Hello and welcome, friends. So, there's been a lot of discussion on the area of expertise recently. Some would argue that being not an expert in who is and isn't an expert, I do not have the expertise to comment on the subject of expertise, but being somewhat of a layman, an amateur, I'm going to comment on it anyway because it is my right as an Englishman. The main question that has been arising is whether we should trust the experts. This has most recently been discussed, or most famously in recent times, been discussed on the Joe Rogan podcast, where Dave Smith and Douglas Murray came to a bit of a clash over the subject, where Douglas Murray did not acquit himself very well and came across very smug and pandering and superior to Dave Smith, who was simply making the statement that whether or not you are a credentialed expert should not prevent you from having the right to discuss a particular subject, particularly if you have read up on it and are quite knowledgeable in it anyway. And that is something that I agree with. I do agree, of course, that you can have varying levels of correctness. You can be right or wrong on a subject, and laymen can be correct on a subject while experts are wrong on a subject. Of course, ultimately, what it should always come down to is assessing the arguments that are presented on their own merits, regardless of who is presenting the argument. And the thing that has really diminished trust in the expert class over the past few years has been, in particular, the COVID fiasco. I won't go too much into it, but essentially for a long time we were lied to about COVID, about its effects, about the necessity of lockdowns, 2 weeks to stop the spread, etc., etc. And that really destroyed the credibility of a lot of people, especially when in events that happened afterwards, the expert class themselves, including people like Fauci, were shown to have or admitted to explicitly lying for the sake of political consensus, for the sake of pushing a particular agenda. Now, many people have commented on this. There were quite a few people defending Douglas Murray. There were many, many more people mocking and condemning Douglas Murray. And I was very, very critical of him myself because, more than anything, his arguments came from a place of credentialism and outright dishonesty in many ways. But this conversation has still been going on, and the most recent interesting conversation I've seen on it has been this debate between Dave Green, otherwise known as the Distributist, on his YouTube channel, with Nathan Cofnas. Now, Nathan Cofnas is an interesting character because he is a lecturer, I believe, either at Cambridge or Oxford University in England, and exists within what you could call the expert class. Except he considers himself, and acts as, somewhat of a dissident. Now, this is because he professes and researches and promotes the idea of human biodiversity, otherwise known as HBD or hereditarianism. This is the idea, the scientific idea, that human traits along the lines of intelligence, personality, behavior, etc., not just physical traits, but emotional traits and everything else I've just included there, are passed down genetically through your ancestral lineage. This is something that I think many more people are beginning to agree with. Excuse me. And many people within my generation especially agree with. I would consider myself somebody who agrees with human biodiversity. Clearly there are differences, group differences between people, and simply saying that you're racist for believing that is not an argument that disproves it, nor is saying stupid things like Lewontin's fallacy that there's more genetic diversity within races than between races. That is a complete fallacy that only really makes sense if you're examining very, very minute differences between people within groups that don't make as much difference as the differences between groups. Clearly, it's a fallacy. There are much better takedowns of it than what I just presented. I might have mangled the argument there, but essentially, simply because there are a lot of differences within groups does not invalidate the differences between groups when the differences between groups are so much more distinct. Either way, he's an interesting fellow because, as I said, he's part of this expert class, but at the same time professes dissident ideas, and he had written a Substack article talking about whether we still need to trust the expert class, where he essentially said there still needs to be an expert class while we change some of the political mechanisms or the recruiting mechanisms for the people who go within the expert class, or we convince those who are already experts onto our side of the argument. He's also, like Richard Hanania and others, somebody who talks about the need for elite human capital over what he thinks exists mainly in the right wing, particularly the online right and the normie conservative right, as what he considers to be low human capital, which he believes is one of the reasons why we've been so unsuccessful in changing and preserving culture over the last 50 years. The interesting thing about this discussion is that despite the fact that he is not in favor necessarily in some positions that the regime takes and professes through the elite class, through the expert class, he actually provides a perfect example in this interview, or debate, however you want to phrase it, of why we don't trust the experts. Now, for the first hour or so of this discussion, they go around and round in circles on the subject of the idea of expertise. They try and nail down the definition of what an expert is, what the standards for the expert is, why you wouldn't consider somebody like Dave Smith an expert on a subject, whereas Nathan Cofnas considers Douglas Murray to be an expert on a subject, whether or not he's made mistakes on it, etc., etc. It's all a bit meandering, it's all a little bit frustrating to talk about, but then they come on to something that's much more concrete and easily provable, right? And that is the effect of the economy over the past 30 or so years, comparing the economy of the 90s to the economy of today, and how well off people are, how their well-being has been affected by the economy. And Dave takes the correct and understandable position that people are worse off in the economy right now because they are less able to buy a house. They have to rely more on rented properties, and the housing that is affordable is further away from the jobs that they have, or is in areas where there are no jobs at all. And you would expect, given that there is a wealth of data proving all of this, this is not just a problem in America and Canada, this is a problem all across the Western world. In England, house prices, we've covered this countless times on the podcast, are skyrocketing, making it unattainable for young people to even consider home ownership, primarily due to the effects of things like inflation and supply and demand, where demand has been skyrocketing because of mass immigration. There is a wealth of data on all of this, and Nathan Cofnas, I can only assume, and this is me making a guess here, I can't assume to know his inner mind, but this is what it comes across to me. In the aim of defending the parts of the current regime that he likes, because he is part of the expert class and considers himself part of elite human capital, and also because he is somewhat disconnected from the consequences of the housing crisis, given that he lives in subsidized university housing, decides to make the argument that because economists have calculated that a basket of goods which does not include housing is cheaper than it was in the 90s, or in the metric that he uses, takes less minutes of work to purchase than it did in the 90s, that people are more well off and the economy is doing better than it was 30 years ago. Excuse me again. This is quite a lengthy clip, so I'll let it run through, but this should give you ample reason, ample example of why it is that the expert class has been so thoroughly tarnished, because when asked a very simple, straightforward question that any layman can see the answer to, he, instead of answering it directly, waffles, he diverts, he pontificates, he refers purely to consensus of other elite expert class opinion makers, and does everything that he can to lie using facts. Take that in mind here. Lie using facts. The economists have calculated a basket of goods made up arbitrarily of whatever products they deem to make up this basket of goods is cheaper factually than the same arbitrarily chosen goods 30 years ago, while they exclude from that basket of goods things that actually make up the largest expenditures for people month by month. And by this metric, they can then say that the economy is doing better, people are wealthier than ever. It is a way of lying using facts, if you understand me. Anyway, I'll play this clip and you can see what I mean.
The country is far better off than we were before. We're much richer and the living standard is way higher. The economists were entirely right about that. The free traders were.
Wait, it's from the 90s.
We were much richer than we were in the 90s. Correct.
By what metrics?
I mean, how many minutes you have to work to buy a basket of goods? I mean,
A basket of goods. No, stop that there. Excellent standard. Let's take houses, education.
Okay, so education. First, what you're getting everybody wants. If you want to live like
houses
a Detroit,
is more substantial.
If you want to live like a Detroit auto worker in the 1970s,
how many minutes?
If you want his standard of living, you can buy a house in Detroit for
how many minutes
dollars.
does it take to buy a house in a location that is?
Before we carry on, let's just catch what he said there. If you want to live like a 1970s auto worker in Detroit, then you can still buy a house in Detroit for a few $1,000s. It is true that house pricing in Detroit are very, very low. House prices in Detroit are very, very low. But are you having the same quality of life as that auto worker from 1970s Detroit? No. No, you're not. It's a barren wasteland. It is one of the most, shall we say, diverse cities in America as far as I have seen, and it is a completely non-functional city in many places. Those houses that he's talking about where you can get a 1 or 2 bedroom house for $5,000 in Detroit are not in areas that you want to live in. They are not in areas that have infrastructure. They are not in areas that have jobs. They are not in areas that are safe. You do not want to live in those neighborhoods. So straight away, you can see him trying to deflect, trying to change the standards, or just using bad, dishonest examples.
Is within commuting distance of an actual job that I could hold.
Look, people are paying more for houses and they're getting a lot more, and they become a lot pickier.
This is absolutely
completely changes the standard and starts to try to change the dynamic, shift the goalposts and add extra context, which isn't true.
Absolutely insane, Nathan. This is absolutely hogwash you're doing on my show.
Education.
If I didn't know better, I might say you were lying.
Well, anyway,
So look. It is demonstrably true that the housing cost in this country, I'm in Canada, it's even worse. It has skyrocketed past the wage earning. And the houses that are being built are further away from the jobs, meaning that they're harder to purchase. You are getting more, meaning you're getting more square feet. Yeah, you're getting more square feet for the houses because they're building these huge McMansions on small lots. I can see this right now. The houses have less utility and younger people can't purchase them. If I graphed home ownership, it would be it's a continuous line down. If what you were telling me right now about houses were true, that houses are just as affordable as they would be, and you have to work just number amount of minutes to get a house, like on median, statistically, then why isn't home ownership going up rather than down, Nathan?
You said on the
Brilliant takedown. Everything that he said there is correct. Got to give big props to Dave for this. He doesn't have to do all of these insufferable debates and interviews with people. He's very well known now for taking on debates with very disagreeable characters. He doesn't have to do it. I think Dave simply does it for love of the game. And whether or not I think these conversations are ultimately productive, they are certainly informative and interesting. And I've got to respect him for his sheer tolerance for being able to do stuff like this, especially because Dave is clearly very intelligent man who can present arguments very, very well. And he is really pinning Nathan down here.
To buy the median house.
No, the
median
person.
The median person.
Statistically,
Look,
the statistical median person. What is the earliest age they can buy a house, and how many minutes do they have to wait?
Can buy a house. I said you can buy for a house in Detroit for a few $1,000s and live there.
It's so disingenuous. And again, by switching the metric from the individual to the median, he's trying to, again, lie using statistics.
The life of a
There are
Detroit
no
auto worker.
jobs in Detroit, Nathan. And the reason why there are no jobs in Detroit is because the country deindustrialized. How do you not understand that?
Okay, well, anyway, look, the economist
I'm
will
not
be
seriously
right.
like, what, do you not see the problem with what you just said? Like, how is this not discrediting in the same way that you imply to you right now? How is this not discrediting for you in the same way that Dave Smith quote that apparently exists but I can't see here does? You're telling me that the median person can purchase a house in a location that doesn't have jobs because we deindustrialized?
So is there a single serious economist in the world who agrees with the position that you appear to be defending?
I'm asking you a specific question on a fact.
There you go. He can't answer a single question without deferring to the knowledge of expertise, the other experts who are in the same class that he considers himself part of, even when it is the easiest and simplest question to answer, because everybody knows, or everybody should know, that there is a housing crisis going on right now. Many people dispute the reasons for that housing crisis, but still everybody knows that there is a housing crisis going on. So the very fact that he can't even acknowledge that basic fact, which is attested to both by personal experience of people on the ground and statistically as well, and will try to lie using disingenuous arguments or statistics, is very telling of the kind of attitude that these people take, that they can just brazenly lie to you. They can brazenly lie to you. They can tell you to your face that the cat is the dog, the sky is purple, and trees are made of cotton candy. They think they can tell you all of these things to your face and use tricksy word games to be able to do so. And this is one of our so-called dissident experts, because of the fact that he disagrees with the Academy on the idea of human biodiversity, which is something that, again, is becoming increasingly popular and increasingly normal for people to agree with. Obviously, there are biological differences between groups. Because of the fact that he agrees with us on this does not mean that he's a trustworthy character when it comes to anything else, because as you can see here, he is still trying to uphold this modern economist lie that the regime pushes, that the economy is doing better than ever, you're richer than ever, why are you complaining? Just go along with it. And this is, as well, a really great example of a particular kind of argumentative strategy that people like Nathan Cofnas take, which has been explicated in other places, but I'll give a little rundown of it right now, which is first that they will rely, people like Nathan, liberals and those types, will rely at first on your ignorance, and then when you prove yourself to actually know about the subject, they will feign ignorance, at which point they will try to change the subject, move the goalposts, change the parameters of the discussion, and every time you will try to actually pin them down on anything, they'll be able to slip away and try to change the subject or switch it around on you without ever really answering the question. And unfortunately, he also exemplifies another part of this strategy, which is as soon as you've gotten them down on something that they can't escape from, they'll say, oh, you got me. But then just a few days later, Nathan was posting about this on his Twitter account, saying about how low IQ Dave was, about how Dave was trying to get people to agree with low IQ, low information, non-experts on subjects when they should still be deferring more towards an expert class, despite the fact that all it takes is watching through 5 minutes of this to see that Nathan was being a very, very slippery character and very dishonest in the way that he was arguing. So he then declared himself a few days later the victor, when clearly he had no answers, no honest answers for anything that Dave was challenging him on. And if we go further into the interview, you can see that he is still doing this later in the interview. This is when Dave manages to get him down on the subject of housing. This becomes, for the next hour, hour and a half, the whole subject of the discussion. And Nathan does not admit at any point here, at any point, I got this wrong. I got this wrong. He does not back down. Let me just give you an example. If I skip to, I don't know, 20 minutes after this particular part of the clip, let's see what they're talking about.
You say that we became poorer with free trade. So it sounds
then
like
the economists were wrong about the fate of reorganizing the economy like we did.
Well, you think it's a bad thing that we became poor because because of NAFTA?
Yes, I think it's a bad thing that we became poor. Yes,
Yeah,
Nathan.
it's a bad thing we became poor.
Moral statement.
And
it is a bad
NAFTA,
thing that the media, do you agree with that? Is it a bad thing that the median person, the median 30-year-old person in this country, can't afford a house remotely near the place where he works?
Look, there.
Is that a hard statement for you to make?
Okay, you're making a factual claim.
No, it's a moral claim.
Look at the data.
I'm asking you a moral claim. Is it bad that median people have a harder time affording houses?
If the empirical claim were true, would be better for people to be able to buy a house.
See how painful it was for him to make that one admission to Dave's position right there. And it is ridiculous. And the entire interview is like this. The entire interview is him doing his absolute best to avoid addressing anything that Dave is actually saying to him. And so if you want to understand, again, why it is that people don't trust the experts anymore, and frankly, in many cases, shouldn't trust the experts, it's because they will lie to your face happily. They think they are better than you. Even our so-called based experts still think that they are too good to answer any of your questions, even when they are demonstrably, obviously, in the wrong. And if you want to watch the rest of this debate interview, please feel free, go ahead. It is very informative, but I warn you, it's very frustrating. But if you've not got the right music on at the gym and you need to really push through, get a good pump, this might enrage you just enough to push out a few extra reps. So enjoy.